Okay, for our last bit, what we need to do is we just need to make that play button active so that when we click the play button, both the people that have been invited and the person who accepts the invitation get kicked over to the game board. All right, so to do that, let's go to main.js. And in main.js, we're going to need basically a new function, just like we have a function for inviting an invite response, an invite who, and uninvite response. And what we can do is we can take these commands and we'll copy them. So we'll start with the uninvite and uninvite who, and we'll copy it down below. And instead of uninviting, we'll say send a game start message to the server. And who are we going to, let's see, this will be game start, and who's going to start the game? We'll have a payload and a requested user, and we'll say that we'll send a client message that said game start was called with a payload, and the event that we're going to emit to the server is going to be game start payload. And there's only going to be one response for this. This will be a response that says that it's just a game start response. So it'll be a game start response. Handle notification that we have been engaged to play, and we have a function, we get a payload, and we have to decide what we're going to do here. Okay, well, for starters, we're going to make an engaged button, and with the payload and socket ID, and then once we have that, we're going to put that in place. And once we've put that in place, then we're actually going to jump to a new page. So we'll just show that button briefly before we jump to a new page, and that we're going to do that by saying window.location.href. We're actually going to change the browser, and we're going to go to game.html username equals single quote plus username plus single quote ampersand game underscore ID equals single quote plus payload.game ID. Great. All right, and so that just means that if we hit the play button, then we'll call the game start function. The game start function will emit a game start event to the server. The server will respond with a game start response. We will put an engaged button in place, and then we'll jump to a new page. So let's go check to make sure we spelled this right. Here I'm calling make engaged button, and down here I have make engage button. So I'm going to change that to make engaged button. Well, just like these guys, if we have a play button in place, we're going to need to add a function to our play button so that when someone clicks on it, we call game start with the socket ID. And so that'll start our game. Let's go up there, make sure we called it right. Okay, so we'll call our game start button, and that'll be great. And our make engaged button is fine, and the make engaged button doesn't need any click result because it's only going to be there briefly. And so that should be everything we need on the client side. Now we just need to go to the server side and make sure that we can handle the game start event. Again though, before we go to server.js, let's just take a look at make play button, because we forgot that this has to receive a socket ID, and then we have to go to the places where it was called and make sure that we pass it the socket ID, payload.socket underscore ID. And then I just want to do a few cleanup things. I want to go up here to this weird situation where if in join room response, if for some reason we find that we already have the row there, if we already have a row for the person in place, before we show it, I just want to call uninvite. Uninvite. Payload.socket ID. So just in case there's some confusion and that element already existed, I want to call uninvite, and then come down here, great. And then we'll make our payload button, And then one other thing I want to do is I just want to clean up our send message structure just a touch. Right now, when those messages appear, they're not sliding nicely. So I'm going to go find our send message function. There's uninvite, uninvited, game start, send message response. Okay, I'm going to move send message in front of send message response because that's just the pattern. In send message, we no longer need to send it a username. All right, and in the send message response, I want to do something that's more like what we did in the other one. So I want to make some new HTML and set that equal to what we have here. Let's see, PB, payload surname says, okay, and end like that. And then I want to do new node, set that equal to jQuery called with new HTML. And then I want to say new node.hide. And then I want to append my new node here. And then I want to show my new node. All right, I think that's everything. Let's just take. Okay, the main thing that we want to do now in our server.js file, let's go to server.js. Go to the top, and as we scroll down, there's join room, that's good. And there's disconnect, that's good. Here's our send message command. I'm just going to go ahead and remove from our send message command the need to have a username, because what we'll do is we'll just base that on the socket. So down here, instead of var username payload dot username, we'll say it's going to be players socket dot ID dot username instead. And that should work out okay. And then down here, we'll just clean it up and get rid of sockets and make it io.in.room. That's good. And then after uninvite, let's put our game start command. So let's copy our uninvite command. Copy that and go down to the bottom of uninvite and paste uninvite there. And instead of uninvite, we'll say this is going to be the game start command. The requested user, the socket ID of the person to play with, and the game start response is going to be the success, and the socket ID of the person you are playing with. And then we also, in this case, we have to have a game ID, which is going to be the room of the game in which you're playing, the chat room. ID of the game session. Or you can fail, and then there's only just a game start response, and that'll go to both people who are part of the game. So this is we're handling what we get if we get from the client the game start event, and we will say we got the game start with these parameters. Make sure that we got a payload and say game start had no payload, then abort, and we will send that back, error back in the game start response. Check that let's see, we need to check that the message can be traced to a username, and that's fine. And if it can't, then we say game start can't identify who sent the message, and that is a game start response. And then if the requested user, we need to check to see if the requested user is present. And if the requested user is present, great. And then we need to get the room, and we'll get the room of the current player. We'll get the room object. We will make sure that the person to play with exists. If they didn't exist, then we'll say game start requested a user that wasn't in a room, command aborted. And we will say game start response. But if everything is okay, then we are going to say that we need a game ID. So let's make a game ID with this funky function. Game ID equals math.floor, and we'll say it's 1 plus math.random times 0 x1 1 2 3 4 zeros dot to string 16 dot substring 1. And then we will make a packet that says who's playing with who. So the first one will be success, and the socket ID will be socket.id, and the game ID will be the game ID, and that will be good. And then we are going to, let's see, actually the one that goes back is going to be a game start response, but the one that goes back to that person is going to be the requested user. All right, success, requested user, game ID, socket emit, game start response, success data, and then, so if everything was okay, respond to the game starter that it was successful, and tell the other player to play. And that's going to be a comma at the end. And so in this case, it's going to be socket ID, game ID, send it to the requested user, and the event is going to be a game start response. And then finally, we'll say that game start was successful. Okay, if everything goes well, we'll get it to compile, and then this will be the kicker that goes into our final game page. Save that, come on over here, stop our server, restart our server. We're waiting for it. There, it's running. And we'll play. And Don will enter the room. And Zara will enter the room. We'll send a message, make sure messages send. And it opens up. And then we will invite and uninvite, invite and uninvite, invite, and then play. Great, and then it kicked to the new game. That file doesn't exist, that board game file doesn't exist, but we're ready for the final step of our programming challenge. Okay, thank you for your attention.